And welcome into yet another edition of the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod. I'm your host, Blake Terrence. Quentin James back from his vacation. Here's alongside us. Now it's Kyle's turn to have family obligations, so he's out. Trent, as you guys met last week, is out for work. But we've got a new face. As I told you, I previewed that my girlfriend's roommate, her name's Eileen. I usually call her by her last name, Marty, so we'll figure out what we call her throughout this podcast. But she joined, so we're excited to have a new face in the studio. Q, I want you to start with where were you last week when we talked about you're all mad at us for you missed the Chiefs Legacy conversation, so we're going to give you a chance there at the very end to get your takes in on that. Where did you go off to as we recorded that one?
Yep, I was down in South Carolina and Charleston, to be exact.
Nice.
Flew out there with the fam and spent some time on the beach. Saw some historic sites. Got some sun. Not much in the water because it's still really cold, but it's a good time.
Marty, are you a beach and water type person, or different nature sceneries for you?
I love the beach. I love the water. I grew up camping and swimming in the lake, like on the beach. We didn't have a boat. We had a travel trailer. So I slept in a lot of Walmart parking lots on trips. That's super fun. But no, I love being outside in general. I mean, I sat outside for a couple hours today, just sitting out there, just hanging out.
Oh yeah.
I like being outside.
I generally love to do that. I can't do that as easily this time of year because I'm cursed with the spring allergies, so that's fun. But in the fall, I do it all the time. Okay, but that is like, you just dropped that nugget there. That is like prime people watching territory. I'm sure you've got a Walmart parking lot story.
Okay, so it's not a people watching story, but the only one that I can remember is when there was a tornado warning when we were sleeping in a Walmart parking lot.
Well, at least the building's big and sturdy.
Yeah,
I think.
It was just like 3 a.m. and I was like 8 or 9 when this happened. Woke us up. We have 3 dogs and my hamster, Toby was his name. We were all in this trailer and the sirens go off. My youngest sister is, probably 4 or so. So my mom's carrying her and all of her, loveys and things like that she needed with her. And my sisters and the rest of us are grabbing the dogs and we're running into Walmart. It's pouring rain and my sister dropped something, so my mom bends down to pick it up and they just fall down. So even worse, compounding, even worse. We run into Walmart and then I realized we didn't grab my hand. So I can't, the entire time we're in this Walmart, I'm like, Toby's on there.
Okay, that's hilarious though that's where the story went, because I had this I was definitely gonna say I have this idea of the tornado actually. I assume there was no tornado actually that got anywhere near you that time.
Nope, not to my knowledge. We went back to the trailer and slept, and then we went back to Walmart and the morning breakfast.
I had this idea in my head that the hamster, I don't even know, I'm assuming that's not what he was in at the time. He was probably in a more sturdy permanent cage, but you know how they make those hamster balls that they roll around in. I just have this image of this hamster in the ball and it just gets blown away and he's all fine because he gets protected by his ball and he just winds up and we're not in Kansas anymore.
Well, I was so he was in a plastic cage. It was this travel cage we had, so it was smaller and plastic.
Yeah.
Dining room table right next to a window. So I kept thinking this window's going to break and he's going to get sucked up in this plastic thing because it's not secured. And I'm just going to...
I mean, it's not funny, but it's kind of fun.
Oh, he survived, right? He made it through.
He did. He died. I don't remember how long later it was, but it was on Easter. And my parents didn't tell me until the next day because they didn't want me to be sad on Easter.
That seems considerate.
I didn't notice.
They come and go.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, they don't live that long either, do they? They don't live as long as cats and dogs, do they?
I've never had a hamster, but I think they live a couple of years. Maybe.
Yeah.
4 or 5, maybe.
Yeah, they do. I had a lot of pets growing up. We were called the Zoo House. I mean, we still got a pet pig. There's that, but we had guinea pigs, and guinea pigs are actually pack animals. So if you ever get a guinea pig, get 2.
Oh, really?
They live long.
I know that. Huh?
Had a Steeler one.
Isn't that kind of how rabbits are too? don't rabbits do better socially or something?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. I
Anyway,
don't hamsters. I think hamsters are a little different. They can't be
right.
from what I remember. Hamsters cannot be siblings. But, like, we had a pair of brothers for guinea pigs, and they were great. Like, they lived like almost 10 years, I think. They live a lot in
Right.
pairs.
All right. Well, here on the Calling It How I See It Hamster Pod, we're going to jump into the sports stuff now. We got a lot to get to today. Of course, like I said, we're going to wrap up with kind of revisiting that Chiefs legacy talk. We're going to let Q and Marty give their takes since they weren't on last time. We'll kind of give you a rundown of how we feel as the free agency wave more or less is wrapped up and we're heading into the draft. And then we're going to start, though, with some basketball, and then after that, we'll touch on Royals as we record this the night before opening day. So we'll touch a little bit on that series, then kind of touch on some things that we want to see from the organization, and we'll each give some win predictions on that as well. So let's start, though, with the hottest topic, also recording the night before, of the second round of March Madness. So obviously, we're KC locals, so we've got two Mizzou folks, and Marty on just, she's kind of like Kyle, she grew up a KU fan, and both, so everybody on here is just miserable at the end of the day. KU at least gave a better showing. Really thought they had a chance with Arkansas's top scorer out for that game, but didn't come to pass. And then Mizzou did that thing. So we'll start off talking that. Q, Kyle and I'm sure you've seen a lot of the texts. Kyle and I kind of had this back and forth with Trent last week about, Drake being the Cinderella darling. I kind of was annoyed by some of the analysis that was going into that because Drake had that Cinderella win behind him. Everything was kind of predicated on Drake controlling everything and, setting their tempo and doing everything their way without contrasting it to how Mizzou liked to play. Well, I don't even know how to describe what happened because, it's not even about not wanting to give Drake credit. I'm happy for Ben McCollum. I'm happy for Drake fans that they won a tournament game. I'm happy for McCollum that he got a big raise with the Iowa job. I think we all knew he was probably not going to last at Drake very long at all. In fact, he only ended up being there 1 year. So kudos to them. But I don't know. I just still have a hard time doing like, oh, Drake did that tempo thing. They forced, sure, they forced Mizzou to make a few mistakes, but Mizzou, they could have done what Texas Tech did. What Texas Tech did in the second round was the exact recipe that we called for of Mizzou, is that you've got to get out in the fast break. You've got to hit your shots. You're more athletic. You're more talented than them. So I'm willing to give Drake their kudos, but I think what happened is exactly what I was afraid would happen. I said last week they absolutely could lose this game, but I'm pretty sure if they do, it's going to be because it's going to be their fault. They're going to they're not going to come in prepared for how Drake wants to play. They're not going to be hitting their shots. They're going to be all out of sorts the way they were at the end of the regular season. And I just we had, usually you go into a tournament when the team that finished the regular season cold, and you're like, well, hopefully not all of those things will be true at the regular season. Hopefully there's a new gear they can hit. Well, it was like they decided just to add a little icing on the cake of the shit show they turned into at the end of the regular season. Caleb Grill's still not hitting shots. They're still out of sorts in transition, missing easy opportunities, and then they didn't even feed Mark Mitchell and get work done inside as they should have with their size advantages. So after watching that game, maybe you disagree. Maybe you think Drake just played their just perfect game and controlled everything, but I just saw Mizzou, frankly, pissing a game away. What did you see?
Well, we were kind of live talking about it in the text chain with Kyle, and I kind of from the jump had a different view of it than you did. I thought that Drake very much was controlling the tempo of the game. They were not allowing Mizzou to get into their offense at all. Now, granted, Mizzou did miss some open shots, but a lot of it was just excellent defense from Drake, which we'd seen all year long. They had one of the fewest points per game allowed in the country, and it just seemed like we were really unprepared for their style of basketball, which is concerning and surprising, seeing as we played in the most difficult conference in the country. But I think they did have a different style of play than we were used to, and we just weren't able to adjust. I think it was our worst game of the season. We shot 33% from the field, which is, I mean, that's bad for any team, let alone a team that shot about 50% on the year. That's pretty
Yeah, I mean
atrocious.
that's how Mizzou was. That's how they were going to win, was shooting the ball well.
Yep.
Sorry for the bad angles. Let's turn up my headphone volume there. So, but I mean, why do you attribute that to Drake made them do that as opposed to they just? I mean, I like your unprepared comment. I do think they came in and just got thoroughly out prepared, out coached. I mean, that's more than any one player. I was talking about how Caleb Grill was kind of low key bad over the last month of the season, and that did carry over. Mitchell, I have a hard time coming down too hard on because we don't even know how healthy he was playing. That's who bears the biggest brunt of this by far is Dennis Gates. I mean, I think the way I put it on Twitter is, the first 3 years of the Dennis Gates era have been a roller coaster. And, you've made the valid point in the past that that's probably going to be pretty normal as we go into this NIL era, that like you might see dramatic year to year swings. But if this is the fun part of the roller coaster, I can't recommend the ride anymore. Like, I mean, they're not going to fire him this year. It's a $20 million buyout, so it's not even a discussion. But, I mean, so what makes you think that Drake, did anything that Mizzou, couldn't have responded to? I mean, you touched on them missing open shots. I mean, there were so many opportunities for Mizzou to do their thing. Drake was actually uncharacteristically a little sloppy with the ball. That was kind of what their offense was based around. Not explosive, but very fundamentally sound. I mean, Drake had their fair share of turnovers, especially early in the game. So, like, are you just are you trying to not be a sore loser, or did you really see something that Drake did beyond just Mizzou pissing the game away?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's some combination of both. Mizzou also had 17 turnovers, which
Oh yeah,
has
they
to be
did.
close to a season high for them. We typically took pretty good care of the ball throughout the year. I, I definitely agree that Dennis Gates got very outcoached in the game. And the fact that we never really got a solid rotation with this team is another kind of sticking point, that when it comes to tournament time, you want to have your 7 or 8 guys who you're locking
Right.
in.
Depth is nice, but not knowing who's good is not. Like,
Right. And the other thing that this team lacked was a true star.
mm-hmm.
And that can be a strength as well if your star has a bad night, or if one guy has an off night, then somebody else can pick up the slack. But in this instance, no one really stepped up to take the game over, and um, that just showed. I think it'll be interesting to see next year as some of these guys progress in their development. Obviously, we're losing a lot of key pieces, but I don't know. I think there's some bright spots there as well. But overall, I mean, Drake, very talented team. They did have a star player in Bennett Sturts,
Mm-hmm.
second coming of Larry Bird. You might say he won the Larry Bird Award this year in the Missouri Valley Conference. He really dominated and set the tone for the game as Drake,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he did.
as a team.
No doubt. Well, the team on the other side fared a little better, but ultimately came up short as well. Marty, you're the KU person in here. What did you see throughout that game? Was it a continuation of everything that had been a problem that got KU down to a 7 seed this year? Did new problems pop up? What did you see in that game?
I feel like it was just continued problems from the year. High turnover rates, that was a huge problem this year. I noticed a lot more difficulty with passing, either going over heads or just completely, like, I've never seen so many rough passes consistently. Like, it just felt like they were lost sometimes. They didn't know where people were. They just weren't together. I know it's hard, essentially having a brand new team every year, but we did still have 3 returning starters, scholarship players. So,
Yeah, KU didn't really get that excuse this year, to be honest.
Exactly. And so I did feel like, people have their thoughts, this, that, about certain combinations on the KU team and who should and shouldn't be on the floor together. But I feel like that's pretty common. But something that I feel like did help was having KJ and Dwan on the the floor together. Just in that passing moment, I feel like KJ and Dwan had that connection, but that is several years of development for that connection versus these other guys where it was kind of slipping through them. I will say Hunter did have some problems with this, but he is not always the quickest to react. No hate against him or anything like that, but sometimes I just feel like he could be a little more on the jump with some things. I mean, you're 7 feet tall. You're right there. Get your hand up.
Yeah, honestly, I felt like that was the games were going on quite a bit at the same time, but in the way as much as I was able to watch both of them, I think you and I talked about that when we were just chatting in person last week. That was a common thread for both games. Q, I don't know if you observed that for both games too, but like Mizzou had a lot of that same stuff. Like that's kind of what I reference when I say like Mizzou pissing the game away is there were so many opportunities. Like, what she's talking about with KU just having good passes open for good shots and the pass just goes out of bounds. Like we saw so much of that too. They get out in a fast break and there's just no cohesiveness. It's, Grill gets out in a fast break and he's looking for somebody to dump it to down low and nobody gets open. So he jacks up a terrible 3 or, Robinson or Perkins get the ball in open court and they're looking for somebody to dish it to and they throw it to a spot where they think somebody's going to be in, nobody's there, and it goes right to Drake or goes out of bounds. I mean, they both just seemed unprepared a little bit for their games.
Yeah, just sloppiness, I think, on both sides. Mizzou let Drake, I mean, to Drake's credit, like I said, they got in the passing lanes. I think that was one of the keys to what they did. Typically Mizzou kept a lot of teams on their heels. Drake was not afraid to jump in those passing lanes and turn them over, much like what Mizzou would try to do to their opponents. So I think that was a big part of it. Honestly, probably knowing less about Mizzou might have given them an advantage and more confidence in taking those risks, whereas other teams would know how good of a fast break team Mizzou was and stay back on defense. But as for the KU game, I didn't catch a whole lot of it, but I think, yeah, to
I think what
Eileen's
Kyle said,
point.
they had 3 or 4 turnovers in the last 2 minutes. I mean, that'll sink any game.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, it's just sloppy. I mean, none of the things that happen, I was like, why are we letting it happen right now? We're just not paying attention. We're just not doing it. KU previously has been so successful with the fast break. Like they go up tempo, and that is generally how they win games. And I just wasn't seeing that this year. Anytime they tried to up the tempo, something went wrong, and the other team benefited.
And that's an inherent advantage of being able to run the fast break. I mean, because you're kind of limited to that Drake style. It doesn't have to be to that extreme of a level, but if you're not cohesive enough to get out in a fast break, you're not going to get, because people always think like the fast break is like it gets kind of dismissed as this freestyle street ball thing, but what it can do if you're good at it is it can actually make offense a lot easier. You get a lot of easy points. It's a lot harder to set up those elaborate plays and get looks at the rim when the defense is, reacting to everything you're doing. But I mean, that's why you got to have a fast break element. I think people will be surprised how what percentage of points teams that are effective in transition get that are, I'm sure I'm sure Ken Palm or some analytics site can give each basket a degree of difficulty. And I think when you look at teams that are really good offensively, I think a lot of people would be surprised how many of the points that really good offenses get. A lot of them are easy points because they're uncontested after a well-run fast break. And so if you can't do that, you really put a ceiling on your offensive output.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about a few of the other, or I guess a few of the matchups that we're about to see. I think one of the teams that we're most intrigued by at this point is Arkansas, because of course after knocking off KU, they took out a lot of people's darling, if that can be a term for a 2 seed, but a bit of a surprise 2 seed in St. John's. Kyle said last week he had him winning the championship. I did have him in the championship game in one of my brackets. My brackets are holding up a little better because of I chose pretty chalky champions and everybody's still alive. But Q, we've gotten to watch quite a bit of Arkansas this year. We've been having a heated might be a little strong of a word, but a pretty intense Calipari debate in the group chain lately. How much chance do you give Arkansas against Texas Tech?
I mean, I think they've proven already that they are a team to contend with. They've finally kind of gotten healthy, I think, after having a couple key guys out in the regular season and for the KU game. But I mean, they're a team that typically has a lot of talent, and that certainly didn't change when Calipari took over. Obviously, he's known for bringing in the talent. And even despite this being his first year, the results are pretty impressive. I think, I'm not super familiar with Texas Tech. Obviously, they were able to take Drake down, which Mizzou was not able to do. So I don't really know much about their style, but I think it's going to be a good matchup. One of those teams has the potential to go to the Final Four at this point. But yeah.
Yeah, because I think Houston's the 1 seed that most people seem to have the least confidence in, and with the 2 out, that division is or that region, I should say, is kind of wide open. So
they're in the West.
Did I have the wrong
Florida.
region?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, my bad. Well, in that case, then I think Florida's a lot of people's national championship favorite, so that would be quite the upset if they manage to get past Florida. But yeah, I certainly think. Anytime a double-digit seed makes it to the second weekend, you take notice.
Especially since they were the only one that did that this year, which is kind of crazy.
The only one. We'll save the specific Calipari talk for when Kyle's in here to, get all fired up about it. But Marty, I know you kind of noticed this too. The SEC kind of they showed out pretty well. Kyle was talking about last week about how important it's going to be for the SEC to carry through teams at least through the second weekend, ideally for the Final Four, with having 4 of the top 8 teams. All those teams, all the 1s and 2s in the SEC have advanced. Ole Miss made it to the second weekend, and then of course Arkansas, the only double-digit seed. I'm sure that's a bit of an adjustment for you. You're used to not just KU, but kind of the Big 12 in general reigning supreme, and it looks like there might be a bit of a shift going on there.
Yeah, I've said it before. I'll say it again. The Big 12 is known for being the basketball conference. Like, that is the one thing with the Big 12. Football is fine. It's it's a Power 4 conference. It's what it is. But really, basketball is where it shines. But this year, it's just been lackluster. Like, there's been great moments, like Texas Tech. I don't know if I really expected them to go this far, but I never really expect much from them. Baylor, they're out already. Who else is in here at this point?
All right, we're going to start a drinking game for elitist KU fan comments. There's one.
Yeah. Because you know what? This awful. Yeah, it was 21 and 11 or 12 or something like that. Like, people would kill to have that season. So
Yeah.
I'm not even going to complain about that. And the fact that even though we had a terrible season and everybody was just like, what the hell is going on here? We were still a 7 seed.
I don't think anyone in this chat right now can remember a time when KU missed the tournament. Is that fair to say?
I don't know that it's happened in the Bill Self era, has it?
36-year streak.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't even know if it happened in the
that's
Roy
longer
Williams.
than I thought.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that long. So it
long.
didn't happen in the Roy Williams era either, then.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, every year since Bill.
I don't remember exactly when he was there or how long, but
I know they've.
Wow.
There is some discrepancy with the 2018 and things with that and whatnot, but they still consider it the streak because they were in that tournament. So
2018. You refresh our memories. What happened in 2018?
So that was when Silvio De Sousa picked up a.
Oh yeah.
and
so they were not
that was
allowed.
A vacated situation.
Yeah.
Potential money things and whatnot. I honestly have wiped it from my brain now that it's over with. I'm like, I don't need to worry about it anymore because
now that everyone can get paid.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even really know what happened back then. I don't think there's any way to actually fully, truly know what happened. But here we the fuck are.
Yeah, that was a weird deal. That was a very weird deal. I don't remember exactly the details of that. I think.
Yeah, it was something.
I think it had because Self got in trouble for it too. It had something to do with like it wasn't just De Sousa, however you said his name. It wasn't just him getting money. It was like KU coach's involvement because they self-imposed some sanctions. Yeah, it was a weird deal. Let's we want to chat real quick about who we think are most likely teams to make it through this second weekend, make it to the Final Four. Do we talked a little bit about Arkansas. Q, you actually think they've got a chance to get past Florida? Any other teams that like saying that we think Florida and Duke are going to be facing each other in the national championship game? That's about as chalky as you can get. That's not much of analysis. Any other teams besides Arkansas that you think are a bit of a surprise that you think could make it through this second weekend?
It's such a weird tournament. There just haven't been
very chalky.
Any upsets. Yeah. I think
not to cut you off, but
I did pick Duke to win it all. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, me too.
I think the most likely matchup at this point is Duke and Florida. I know I said Tech and Arkansas could make. That was before I saw Florida was in their region.
Yeah, I had the region wrong too. But speaking, we were talking about how Houston's kind of that one seed that most people seem to have the least confidence in. I really do think whoever comes out of that by the way, the Sweet 16 game that I'm most looking forward to is the Tennessee-Kentucky one, because that's going to be, a clash of SEC foes. Kentucky actually beat Tennessee twice this year, if I'm not mistaken. And I really do think that the winner of that game very likely would overcome Houston and make it to the Final Four. Now that is oh God. See, I'm terrible with, so that's the Midwest, I believe. And so that team would likely face Duke in the Final Four. So I would not expect them to make it past Duke, but I think Houston will probably get past Purdue, but I think the winner of the Tennessee-Kentucky game is going to be facing Duke in the Final Four. So that's my little hot take there. Marty, who's your champ pick?
Well, so I made a couple brackets. Florida and Duke are kind of like, I could see it being either or on those.
Right, sure.
I do agree with your sentiment of whoever wins the Kentucky-Tennessee game is going to knock Houston out. No hate to Houston. They cause problems in the Big 12 so, I don't like them. But I just don't think that they are as strong as Kentucky or Tennessee. I do believe I have Tennessee beating Kentucky, but
Yeah, it's a really tough one to call. That might be,
yeah,
I think that might be in terms of excitement.
yeah,
Like I'm expecting Duke and Florida to pretty much take care of business. I think the Tennessee Kentucky game might be the most exciting, back and forth matchup of the week because they face each other twice in the regular season. Both were single digit games, and I believe I could be mistaken on that because I'm going off memory when I looked it up a long time ago, but I believe Kentucky beat them twice. So yeah, that's the one I'm most looking forward to.
yeah.
All right. That's what we're going to. Oh, well, you know what? I want to say something real quick before we move on to our next topic. We'll go into more detail about this next week when we have Trent back on, hopefully, and if this is still relevant. But I do just want to, tell you guys, we all like to share our little fun stories of when we're in some sort of competition. We all talk about our brackets, but, you know, for my sake, if nothing else, granted, the game will have happened by the time you hear this, but push for Alabama for me and my brother Trent because we're in a survivor pool. If you're familiar with NFL Survivor, it works essentially that way where you pick a winner each day until the final four, and then you pick just the winner of an individual game, and you can't pick the same team twice, et cetera, et cetera. And if you make it all the way to the championship game and get that pick correct, you can stand to win some cash. So there's another fun, if anybody's ever looking for a fun, relatively low risk thing to get into. And so we've got a couple entries going on, but we couldn't really find a Thursday game that we loved, and we had to pick a game for each day. So we have Alabama. The Alabama BYU game is going to decide if we get any further because we picked them in both. So everybody root for Alabama for us. We'll go into a little more detail. We'll share more about that. Maybe we'll get some sort of segment going where we talk about a specific prop or a survivor pool or something like that we all like. Maybe we'll delve into that content. But keep that in mind, and hopefully everybody who's got a bracket, hopefully your brackets do strong as well. All right. We're going to move on. We're going to transition to baseball next. Royals open their season in less than 24 hours as we sit here. So stay tuned. And we're back on the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod. Blake Terrence here with you alongside Eileen Marti and Quentin James. All right. Less than 24 hours out from opening day. Weather looks actually like baseball weather. It's warming up just in time, so we hopefully you'll see more than a 1-0 game, as sometimes those cold weather early season games, after the offensive barrage that tends to happen in Arizona, where'd everybody forget their bats? I'm hoping we actually might see some scoring in tomorrow's game. Because there'll be a bit of a turnaround between recording this and getting this uploaded. The game will have probably already happened, and it's kind of a fool's errand to really microanalyze any one individual baseball game until October. So I don't think we'll spend a ton of time on the specifics of this game or any one series quite yet without any context. So I think instead of, talking about specific baseball games, I want us to kind of chat about some of the roster as the 26-man roster is coming into focus. It'll be final tomorrow morning. And then some things we want to see from the organization. Q, I am actually pretty okay with the 26-man roster. I assume you've read some of those articles on that. Really the only question mark that still remains, and it's not really a question mark, it's just a matter of if Vinny Pasquantino, for any reason, can't open the year on the roster, has to start on the injured list, which doesn't appear to be the case. Kevin Biggio has won the final bench spot, according to even Matt Quatrero. It's just a matter of making sure everything's ready and the roster's set tomorrow morning. Lynch made the bullpen as that eighth pitcher. If you haven't actually read it, maybe I should have said that in the prep. Take a second to pull it up if you need to. But I assume you've seen most of the chatting on the roster. Any surprises? Any strong opinions on the roster? Or was it about what you expected?
No, honestly, I think there weren't many surprises. We saw a handful of DFAs. Carlos Hernandez getting scooped up by the Phillies, I think it was. I think we expected him to be the most likely to be picked up by another team. So
Oh yeah.
Not a surprise there, but overall, yeah, I think it's pretty much what we expected. I'm trying to pull up the full roster here, but
Yeah, so we've got. I kind of have it in my head a little bit too. So the bench, assuming that Pasquantino is healthy enough to play first, your likely bench is looking like Fermin, Mark Canna, Dyrone Blanco, and Biggio. Now, the question still remains is who's going to get the DH at bats. I think that's going to be kind of a revolving position. You'll kind of see guys who need a day off, or if somebody's struggling defensively or has got a nagging injury. But this team, really doesn't have a set DH still. So that's kind of the biggest question mark, I think, remaining on the roster. You know, the Mark Canna was kind of a last minute ad. Kind of reminded me, but not in as bad a way, of like when Lucas Duda just suddenly appeared after being on the team and being
oh,
terrible one year. But I think Canna
I didn't think
actually
about that
has
name.
yeah. I think Canna actually does have a skill set that he can bring a little bit. His power numbers are certainly down the last few years. He used to be kind of a traditional first base, high OBP, legitimate power guy. He's 36 years old now, so probably not much pop left in the bat, but generally makes decent contact and a very good swing decision kind of guy. So an on base guy, draws a lot of walks. I think that maybe is my first opinion when I look at this roster overall of the guys that they decided to keep. I like that they prioritized bench guys with skills like that. You know what I mean? Because you've got your backup catcher, you've got Blanco who can play all three outfield spots at least somewhat okay, and very good base stealer and pinch runner, underrated hitter even a little bit. But I feel like even last year, as much as I like what JJ Piccolo has done, on balance, I think he's been a major success so far. But Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson are kind of more examples of some examples from times past where it didn't really feel, you couldn't really see what value they brought. They didn't have any one elite tool like Blanco as his speed off the bench. They weren't good enough hitters to be dependable for any sort of length of time, and yet they got a lot of playing time. And so I like that they're prioritizing guys with specific skill sets. You've got Canna and Biggio, who Biggio's another guy who can play all over the field as well, but both of them, you got a righty and a lefty there, and both of them, are probably past their primes. Biggio's younger than Canna, but certainly just hasn't put up the numbers that he did in his first couple of years now for 2 or 3 seasons now. But even if those guys are 220, 230 hitters like Frazier and Hampson were, they're still going to have OBPs well north of 300 because they draw a lot of walks. So I don't know about you, Q, but that we know that's been something that the Royals have been trying to work on ever since JJ Piccolo took over. I think that's a very encouraging sign that even though they're not overqualified necessarily for the bench, but you actually see what tactical value they have coming off the bench. I think that's what I most take away from this roster.
Yeah, I agree. I think both of those guys, Canha and Biggio, have some real upside. Canha's been a starter in his career, kind of more platoon player lately as he's aged, but um, Biggio, I mean, has somewhat of a pedigree. He came up son of a former major leaguer. Um, he was I believe, a top prospect at one point for the Blue Jays, and had some decent seasons for them as a starter. So bringing in guys like that, where they've had a proven track record as starters, I think adds to your depth at positions where they can really use it, and definitely seem like a better fit than some of the guys we've grabbed in the past who had some questionable histories, and talent, I guess you could say.
Yeah, you mentioned Carlos Hernandez getting picked up by the Phillies earlier. I don't want to spend a ton of time on a guy who's gone now, but I did think that was kind of an odd sequence of events. I'm just, I'm not necessarily surprised that he was claimed on waivers, but I'm surprised it was the Phillies because that means, so the way baseball waivers work is every American League team gets first dibs, right? It goes in order of standings generally, right? So the team with the worst record last year in the American League gets first dibs, but then you don't get to the National League until all the way past the Yankees. So that means like the Yankees had dibs ahead of the worst National League team. So that means, because I want to say, wasn't Philly the number 2 seed? I can't. I think they won the division last year over Atlanta, didn't they? And I think they were the number 2 seed or maybe number 3. But regardless, I mean, that means that, the Royals obviously don't count. So there's 29 potential teams. And the Phillies would have been, no higher than like 26th, 27th. So I'm a little surprised that he made it that far and then that a team that's, a solid contender would snatch him up. Him being out of options and with that sort of track record, does that show that maybe the Royals have potentially lost a little bit of value? I mean, I'd be less concerned if the Angels had grabbed him, right? Because that's just a team that doesn't have a whole lot of talent grabbing a live arm and just hoping they can salvage something. I almost kind of wonder if I won't call it a mistake yet. We need sample size and we need to see him actually perform before it. If the Phillies cut him in a month, it doesn't matter. But I think it is telling that a team that is solidly in contention. Who, I mean, heck, the Phillies let Carlos Estevez walk, and the Royals got him, and here they are picking up a guy who the Royals have been trying to figure out for 5-6 years now. You see anything there? Does that give you a little concern that another contender thinks they can figure him out?
I tend not to read too much into that. Like you said, probably 20 plus other teams passed on him. This does seem more like a lottery ticket for the Phillies. A guy who has always had really good stuff, throws 100 plus fastball. There's really no risk there for them to stick him at the back of their bullpen. Not super familiar with their roster construction, but if
Yeah, it could be they have an injury in the bullpen or something too. I
yeah,
don't,
there's injuries. I mean, probably the most likely scenario is that he gets cut in a month. But I think his chances had run out in KC, even after serving as maybe our best reliever a couple of years ago. That just shows kind of how far the team has come since then, that we're willing to
Oh
move
yeah.
on from a guy like
That's
that.
definitely the glass half full version of, I threw out the glass half empty analysis there, but I mean, the fact that a guy who was once the crown jewel of Dayton Moore's pitching development, now JJ Piccolo's essentially said, we got enough guys. I mean, that shows a tremendous amount of progress. I agree with that.
And
All
it
right.
also shows a little bit about Dave Moore's development at the end of his tenure here. We don't have to get into that now.
A lot of it about it, we could say. All right. Let's move on to 3 things we want to see from the organization this year. This could include anything from what they target in the draft to something in the minor leagues to things at the major league level. So, I want to start with something that is kind of both. I want to see even more transactionality from the big league club as it relates to the minor league club. Q, you and I kind of talked a lot about how MJ Melendez should have to earn a spot on the opening day roster this year. Certainly that if anybody outperformed him in spring, like that was on those roster fringes like Velasquez, that, that would bother us if that went unrewarded. Well, that didn't really happen. Melendez didn't have a fantastic spring. It was just kind of mid, but Velasquez was essentially worthless in the spring, and so he's back in Omaha now. I don't necessarily have a problem with Melendez making the roster to start the year. Might as well give him a chance to see what that new swing can do. But, all the talk last year was about how the team didn't have enough depth, right? Like, it was like the moment Vinny Pasquantino gets hurt, which we'll get into here in just a second. Uh, I, you know, I, I did feel like there was a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there. Like, all the talk about not having the depth, and yet, MJ Melendez is, spending 2/3 of the year ice cold, and Drew Waters can't sniff the roster until late August, early September. Let's go. You know what I mean? Like, if MJ Melendez comes out, and sure, you want to give him some time with his new swing, but if he hasn't done anything by May, and Drew Waters is at least competent in Omaha, like, don't tell me you don't have enough depth until we've actually seen what the depth you do have can do. So I don't know about you, but I think, certainly on the level of roster building, making more trades, JJ has definitely shown to be more transactional, but I think there's another level that they could and should hit when it comes to guys who are on the fringes of the big league roster. Another example could be not cycling up very many, guys like Tyler Tolbert or whoever to try to fill those utility roles better than Frazier and Hampson did last year. I think they could I think they could find another level of transactionality.
Yeah, made an interesting point about depth on the major league roster. I think, especially in today's game, depth is such a luxury for a lot of teams. Typically, those with higher payrolls, like the Dodgers and the Yankees, are the ones who end up having uh, more guys that could step into starting roles. But it also takes having a stronger farm system, and the Royals haven't had that really since the wave leading up to the 2014 and 2015 World Series. Obviously, Bobby notwithstanding, but
Right.
I think we are on that path towards developing depth in the minor leagues. So I agree with you there. Last year, it just wasn't there. We had one of the worst farm systems in baseball. I think the draft went well. I think some other guys started stepping up in the minors. So I agree. I think they should be aggressive this year in giving guys chances if guys aren't performing, because you want to take advantage of Bobby Witt's prime years. Obviously, just signed him to that huge contract, and I think it'll pay to be aggressive as much as possible. And I would even extend it outside of the organization and say, be more willing to make trades, and like bigger trades. I mean, we all remember the James Shields trade, as well as the Johnny Cueto deal, Ben Zobrist. Those are all very instrumental in going to and winning the World Series in 2015. So I think, especially for small market teams, you have to take those kinds of risks to really max out your potential.
Yeah, the one thing I'll push back on there, though, is, you make a good point about how they haven't had a good farm system for quite some time, but you don't have to be a top prospect to be worthy of a chance when there is a clear need at the big league level. Like, I'll make the MJ Melendez Drew Waters comp again. Look, I know Drew Waters hasn't really impressed when he got some plate appearances in 2023 on that terrible team. His numbers in Omaha haven't popped at all. But you thought enough of the guy in 2023 to trade a first round pick for him. And MJ Melendez is not your guy if you're JJ Picollo. You inherited him. And I know that he's still probably got the most upside. But again, if he's hitting under 200 come May 1st, even if Waters is just, hitting 250 with a 700 OPS in Omaha, like, where is the, I guess, push the easy button there? You know what I mean? Like you're right that they haven't had a ton of depth, but that can also be somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have somebody at the major league level who's not performing, and you even just have somebody you think could be 2% better for a month while Melendez figures stuff out in Omaha, I mean, wouldn't you agree that's a sense of urgency that's maybe the one bit of transactionality we haven't seen yet?
Yeah.
There's still a bit of that leftover loyalty to a fault.
Remind me, does Melendez have options? Does he have an
I
option?
believe he does. Now again, he's in arbitration now, so he's making seven figures. So it's dicier, and he's probably getting close to that. I can't remember if it's as soon as you reach arbitration or if it's a certain amount of years of service time, but it's around, whenever those are similar things. And so when eventually you get the right, because it's before free agency. Once you accumulate a certain amount of service time or once you reach arbitration, you have the right to refuse to be demoted even if you have an option remaining. So you have a valid point there, but just in general, like that's just one example, but so Biggio, for example, Biggio's going to make the roster. He's going to make just a fraction over the league minimum, right around $1 million. I mean, he's going to get limited opportunity, so it's not a perfect example, but I mean, if Tyler Tolbert, who's, the stolen base king, the Terrence scorer in the minors, but he's never really hit in the minors, if he starts hitting a little bit this year and he's still stealing bases the way he always has, and Biggio's just sucking ass through the first month or two of the season, make that flip. You know what I mean? Like, reward the guys down in the minors, even if you know they're nothing more than utility guys. Well, if you're a major league utility guy, your veteran's not doing anything. You're not losing anything by moving on from him. He's not part of your future. Push those easy buttons. And, it's about a lot of things, from everything from rewarding those career minor leaguers, but it's also just about, again, that next level of transactionality. So that's what I'd like to see there. You kind of talked about a lot of things there in your spiel a second ago. Did you give your first thing or one of the things you want to see from the organization? You said something about the draft. I don't know that you actually gave an item that's something you want to see them do or a trend you want.
Yeah, I think we're aligned on making moves, internal moves, if guys are struggling. I just kind of tacked on, willingness to make trades as well.
Okay, yeah. All right. We'll move on to my next thing. My number 2 is I want to see a little more from the hitting all up and down the whole organization. I know Gavin Cross-Bosley had, what was it? Rocky Mountain fevers. Like, he was sick and, had kind of a chronic illness that took a long time to get over in 23. So people want to give him a mulligan for that year. I suppose, that's fine. But, that wave of guys from the last 4 years, that's generally kind of how the draft works, right? Because guys who are drafted out of college have to be added to the 40-man roster after 4 years. That's a pretty reasonable timetable for guys, especially if they're, over 20, 21 years old, to get to the majors. I need to see a little bit more from the offensive players at all levels. We talked a lot about, Brian Sweeney gets a lot of love, and he gets talked about a lot as the pitching coach, and Alex Zumwalt kind of came in with some of that same tailwind of, he came from, I believe, I don't know if it was Driveline, but it was one of those academies of kind of modern baseball approaches. And he was supposed to kind of bring a lot of modern offensive approaches to this team. And, the guys, your star players have been fine. But, we keep talking about MJ Melendez, and I know they worked on his swing overhaul this offseason, but, why can't we see more improvement from the non-star players? Why has Kyle Isbell never improved as a hitter? Why did it take this long for people to? I mean, everybody could see that his swing was wonky. So I'm glad they've made progress on that. But if it was causing those issues the whole time, you're a little late to the party there. So I want to see some general improvements all up and down the organization of let's get these, especially hitting prospects. Let's get them moving up, because again, that plays into the depth issue. If Gavin Cross were on that timetable, he'd be knocking on the door to unseat MJ Melendez, and yet He may or may not even get to AAA this year. I'm sure he'll get to it, but he may or may not establish himself there yet. Probably going to start the year at AA. Well, he's a college draft pick 3 years ago now. He's about to turn 25 years old. I mean, let's go. We need to see a little more. We need to see a little more firepower from the offense, especially from Bobby Witt Jr. doesn't count. He's preternaturally talented. You don't get a ton of credit as the hitting coach for him being a star player. So, I think we need to see from top to bottom, especially with again, Jack Caglione. I mean, he's a prospect, so he counts toward the player development. But I'm sorry, if he comes up in a year or two and he's, hitting for a lot of power, he was supposed to do that. You know what I mean? So I don't know. What do you think about that, Q? I need to see some more return on investment all up and down the organization from the offensive players that, aren't just naturally expected to be good. I'd like to see somebody break a trend or have a breakout year.
Yeah, no disagreement there. I think you do need to give a little bit of credit for even this potential superstar hitters. I mean, there's no guarantees in baseball when it comes to who's going to pan out in the majors. Bobby Witt may be the exception. He's just kind of a freak of nature, but
He was
it's
born to be a superstar in major leagues.
pretty much. Jack Caglianone, I think it's extremely encouraging what we've seen from him so far. I think it would be wrong to not give the development team any credit there. But I see what you're saying about kind of the mid-tier talent and kind of the stagnation of their progress.
And that's your depth.
Yeah,
That's how
yeah,
you solve
exactly.
depth problems.
Yeah. You have to have you got to see those improvements in the minors to make it worth giving them a shot in the majors. So no disagreement at all there. That kind of aligns with my second takeaway, which is just player development in general making strides. I think they could make improvements on the pitching side as well. I think pitching is in good hands, but a lot of it is kind of veteran guys that are the stalwarts in the rotation. But there's also been a lot of good starter depth come up in recent years. So I'd like to see that continue. I'd also like to see more guys transition to the bullpen, honestly, because a lot of our bullpen guys we've just kind of picked off the scrap heap. I think there's room for some starters to maybe convert to the bullpen.
I hope Lynch is kind of the first example of the starting of what you're talking about there.
Yeah. I was excited to see he made the roster. I think there's a handful of guys who could take that path, and but overall, I agree with your take about just improving hitting development throughout the organization.
All right, my last thing is it's kind of related to the second one, but it's more honing in on a specific player because I think this player is going to have to be an integral part of the Royals, and he's going to have to be better than he's been. Again, this one is even more specifically targeted at Alex Zumwalt and the major league staff because he is an established major league player at this point. Whatever position he's playing, and if he's versatile now, that's great. But Maikel Garcia has to be a better hitter. I mean, the metrics don't support the lack of production that we've seen. Q, I know we were talking about having up looking at the baseball savant stuff. I remember hearing a good nugget on my buddy Seren Petro and Randy Giserli, who's a fantastic baseball analyst for many years now. They were giving out the nugget I'm curious if you can pull up kind of more his general whole profile, but I remember the stat nugget that he's very high up in terms of comparison to the league in the high 80s, low 90s percentiles in terms of chase rate and contact rate. So to translate, he doesn't swing at many bad pitches, and he rarely swings and misses. So, like, again, to put it in context for you, if you're not familiar with some of those terminologies, MJ Melendez actually doesn't swing at many bad pitches either. He has decent, what you would call plate discipline, but because of his wonky swing, he pulls off the ball a lot. He swings and misses at pitches he should at least be able to make some contact on. Maikel Garcia doesn't generally swing at bad pitches and very rarely swings and misses. And yet, the production's not there. So, and, with a guy like him who's, clearly a very gifted defender, very athletic, not as fast as Bobby Witt, yet a markedly better base stealer. And, we'd already see him play all over the infield. He came up as a shortstop. I think he filled in the few games that Bobby didn't play at shortstop. Made a very solid defensive third baseman, was a good defensive second baseman. They tried him out in the outfield quite a bit this year, especially in center field. I think he's going to take some at bats in center field against lefties to give Kyle Isbell a better shot to maybe improve his offensive numbers to face more exclusively right-handed hitters. So I love all that, but like the offensive production's got to be there. And when you got a guy with that kind of talent, those underlying things, clearly the athletic talent to do all those different things well, underlying metrics that say he should be a pretty good hitter. I mean, I remember there was a whole thing about it last year where last year I think the focus was actually on that he had a pretty high percentile hard hit rate as well. I don't know how he fared on that specifically last year. Maybe you can fill in that gap, Q. But, he's also ranks pretty highly in comparison to the rest of the league in terms of how hard his contact is. So not only does he make good swing decisions, not only does he rarely pull off of the ball, but he generally makes pretty hard contact. Well, last year, the issue was that his launch angle was too low. He was pounding a lot of balls into the ground. He wasn't elevating the ball enough. And there was kind of a controversy created in last year's spring training because a lot of people had caught on to that, and they were asking Zumwalt and Cotrero, is the solution that he needs to start trying to elevate the ball more? And pretty much everybody on the Royals definitively said, no, that's not the answer. Well, it's funny because especially early last year, it actually seemed like he did try to do that. And lo and behold, maybe those coaches knew something because it didn't really work. He started the year hot, hit, I think, 3 of his 7 homers. I think he had 7 homers last year, if I remember correctly. And like 3 of them came in April. He had that leadoff homer. Technically, that was in March, but that usually gets lumped into April. And then it didn't really work, and he didn't have a very good offensive season. So I don't know what the answer is, and maybe they were correct that elevating the ball is not the solution for him. But whatever all this means, I mean, eventually when you have a guy who clearly has the athletic ability and the underlying metrics that say he should be a damn good player, and Q, you remember in our text chains before, I think he could be, I call him Diet Bobby. Because again, he's not as fast as Witt, but he's a better base stealer and base runner. He's played very good defense at multiple positions. And all those underlying metrics say he should be better than this. And the Royals when you've got a guy like that, look, there are some guys that, Luke Hochaver comes to mind as his stuff was always way better than his results ever were. And sometimes it just doesn't match up. And there are rare cases like that. But generally speaking, you've got a guy that the metrics tell you has all the tools to be a good player. They got to make him into an everyday hitter.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I would go back to our conversation about third base as being a real kind of black hole for the team going into the season. I am disappointed we didn't try to address that with a trade. We really didn't get anyone else who could play there. I looked up Biggio and Canna have both played there like a couple of innings in their major league careers, but seems like there's not much cavalry coming there. I think his profile is similar to his cousin, I believe it is, Alcides Escobar. They neither of them strike out too much. They both put the bat on the ball and they don't swing at bad pitches, but that doesn't necessarily lend itself to much power or on base percentage. So I think, hopefully the hitting coaches can figure something out there. You're right. His hard hit percentage was kind of middle of the pack on this team last year. So you would expect better results. But his barrel rate was one of the lowest on the team. So it might be more of a, location thing for him. Like
maybe it's just because he doesn't chase bad pitches, he's able to hit the ball harder, but he still doesn't quite get it on the sweet spot the way he should.
Yeah.
So you don't really see as much untapped potential there. You think he kind of is what he is.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I wouldn't mind trading him is he has a lot more value at shortstop than he does at third base. I think we
He does
both
that.
agree there.
Absolutely. Now, if he can start playing center, though, that might unlock a different type of value.
Possibly. I mean, I'm skeptical that he could make that transition, and it still wouldn't be as valuable as playing short, which is locked up for the next decade plus. So I do think it would have made sense to trade him. I think he'd have a lot of trade value to another team and be a lot more valuable to another team than he is the Royals. So I wish.
Don't you
Maybe
think he
that's
would
something
have
they
to?
can look at at the midpoint of the season and see if there's someone else they can put at third.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I wouldn't be opposed to, like, if they wanted to, if there was a team that was interested in a guy with, still quite a bit of major league control, but they were able to maybe substitute him in lieu of a prospect, or maybe they wanted a guy that was going to take two top prospects and they were able to only trade one because they can include a guy like Garcia. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that either. But doesn't he also kind of have to hit a little bit better at least to have that kind of trade value? Because like when I say, when I made the point of, like, you don't necessarily see a ton of untapped potential, you think he kind of is what he is, and you compared him to Alcides Escobar. Well, let's be real here. With anybody except Ned Yost in charge and Esky Magic, if he is what he is right now is kind of a utility player. Like, and I mean, that's kind of what that's what an ideal utility player is, right? The ability to play the hardest positions, either shortstop, center field, or both, and then the willingness and adaptability to play the other positions as well anytime there's an injury or somebody needs a day off, and at least not be a complete black hole in the lineup, which he's not a black hole.
Mm-hmm.
He's an okay, mediocre hitter, but that's kind of if he is what he is, then what he is kind of a super utility man. Does that really have a whole lot of trade value? I like where you're going there, but I still feel like to actualize that potential that you're talking about, even if it's trade bait instead of being a long-term fixture here, I still think the same argument applies, that they got to figure out how to get at least a little more out of his bat.
I don't know. I mean, if he could play shortstop at an above average level and steal 35 bags a year at the rate that he does, you don't really have to hit that much to be a valuable shortstop. So
Yeah,
again,
I mean, you could do worse
I
for
think
a
the biggest
nine-hole hitter. So
right. I think the biggest weakness, the biggest failure of the offseason was not bringing in competition at third base, because
does
as it
India count at
stands,
all in that? He might play some there.
who's that?
India. Like, he's been playing a
India,
lot there in
yeah.
spring.
Yeah, hopefully he gets some reps there as well, but he's mostly been a second baseman in his career.
Yeah.
But no, I do think Garcia could be a very valuable asset to another team.
Even
For sure.
as he is at this very moment.
Even not being a outstanding
Okay.
hitter.
You got any final topics? I think you both, I've done my three now. I think you've technically done two, but if you don't have another big one, we can.
No, I mean, I would just put plate discipline as a whole.
That's a topic. That's the thing. I mean, we touched on how Canna and Biggio, we like that they brought those guys in. I'm curious, if we go back, 23 was such a weird year and the performance was so bad, you want to try not to focus on it too much. I would be curious to know, like, over the last 2 years compared to the Dayton Moore era, if they've made significant strides in terms of their walk rate. I mean, Salvi definitely has to, because, we're assuming eventually that his bat's going to slow down a little bit. I mean, he's not going to have another 48 homer season. He's got to keep up the setting the career high in walks that he did last year. That can't be a 1 year wonder. That's got to sustain. And there's especially the core guys. I think Bobby has shown improvement there. That's kind of already Vinny Pasquantino's wheelhouse. That definitely needs to continue. Like Salvi's, I guess, of the guys who matter the most, that's the one I would highlight. The career high in walks thing last year. I'm not saying he necessarily has to break that. I can't remember the exact number. I think his prior career high was 28, and then last year he walked something like, it was just under 50, 48 or 49 times. So, if it's at 44, 45 this year, that's fine. But he can't go back to his free swinging days as he continues to age. So,
yeah.
All right. Last topic here on the Royals before we move on to letting Q and Marty weigh in on the Chiefs stuff real quick. Mentioned Vinny Pasquantino a second ago. Now, it looks like they dodged a major bullet. He says he's fine. It looks like he should open. Well, they won't know till tomorrow morning on whether he officially makes the opening day roster. But it looks like he won't have to start the year on the IL. But tweaked his hamstring running out a grounder to first base the other day, last weekend in Arizona. Last year, of course, had the thumb injury. The year before that, missed most of the season with a significant shoulder injury. I know we love the guy. I loved hearing his interview on Kaufman Corner. I think he's a great guy to have around. I'm even fine with him still being an integral part of this lineup, but he's got the injury prone label at this point. There was been a lot of talk over the last year of, obviously it would never be anywhere close to the number Bobby Witt Jr. got, but like, hey, we did Bobby. Let's lock up Vinny now. Especially with Jack Quaglione in the system now, I'm good there. He's getting to be at that Lorenzo Cain injury prone label now at this point. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, but I'm off that train. What about you, Q? Are you officially calling him injury prone? Because it's every year, even twice a year. It's always something.
I think a lot of his injuries have been a little flukier in general, and he also plays a less injury-prone position, so that gives me some hope that it might not follow him his whole career, especially with the ability to DH. He can still have value there.
Yeah.
So
to be clear, we're not in Adalberto Mondesi territory. I don't want to put it there, but
or even
we
Lorenzo
are
Cain
in
territory. He's had what, 2 or 3 injuries, basically 1 per season in his major league career. So I don't know that there's enough of a sample size, and they were kind of fluky injuries. So I would also probably hold off on an extension for right now, but I'm not worried about his ability to impact this team positively. There's always guys who aren't able to put together full seasons right away in their career. I think he'll be able to do that down the road. Maybe that entails more DHing and more first base for Salvi. But we can kind of work with that given our depth at catcher and first base.
That's true. That's the one position that they actually do have. They got catchers coming out of their ears. So hell, maybe you need to flip one of those catcher prospects for an outfield prospect or something.
Third base.
There you go. We're gonna move on real quick to talking about the Chiefs again. We're gonna kind of recap some of the Mahomes Legacy stuff, let Q and Marty weigh in there, and then we will wrap it up here on the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod. See It Sports Pod. Blake Terrence here with you alongside Eileen Marti and Quentin James. And Q, I know you were bummed out to miss the Patrick Mahomes Legacy talk last week. I'll ask you the same question I asked Trent and Kyle. Is he closer to Brady? I think we all established that he's firmly at number 2. He's ahead of the rest of the pack, where we were going off a list of guys who had multiple Super Bowl rings. There was 8 with 2, and then 2 or 3 with 3 and 4, and then Brady sits all alone, of course, at the top at 7. So we kind of all agreed, he's got 3. He's still actually behind Montana and Bradshaw at 4, but we kind of agree that football gets progressively harder by era. So we all seem to agree he's definitively at number 2, but is he closer to Brady or the rest of them right now?
Yeah, I did catch the last episode and see what your guys' opinions on this question was. I would maybe frame it in a different way. I think his floor, we can agree, the floor of his career, given he plays another 5 or 6 or 8 seasons, the floor will be second all time. As it stands right now, just going off counting stats, he's well behind your Breeze, your Manning, your Montana's in terms of passing yards, passing touchdowns, all that good stuff. Now, again, without a major unforeseen injury occurring or something like that, he's going to get there eventually. But I think it's premature to put him ahead of Manning and Breeze at this point. If you
So you think
retired
we weighted
tomorrow,
rings too heavily in that discussion then? Because
yeah, I mean,
that's the argument that he's ahead of those guys, is that he surpassed them in rings.
right. But to the same point, there's other guys who have more rings than him who aren't named Brady. So there is a longevity aspect to it that I think is important. And again, I mean, I think maybe I'm trying hard not to be a homer and give that alternate view since we are
That's
all
fair. That's fair.
big Chiefs fans. I think, like I said, he's only about halfway through his career. So there's a lot that remains to be seen. He could win 5 more rings. He could win none. There's just so much up in the air for him right now to be talking about legacy. But like I said earlier, I think his floor, if he continues at his current level, is second best all time, with obviously potential to surpass Brady, but that's far from guaranteed.
Oh, yeah. Marty, I'll get to you here in just a second. Q, I want to pose the question specifically that I posed to Kyle and Trent when we talked about this. What exactly has to happen in the rest of his career for him to get to Brady's level? I made the point that he doesn't necessarily have to get to 7 titles for him to at least say the argument that he at least matched Brady. For example, with the trend he's on, you talked about floor. I mean, his floor is the conference championship game. So you could theoretically imagine a scenario. Now, this would require a ton of fantastic roster management, et cetera, et cetera. But you can imagine a scenario where he gets to an 11th Super Bowl. Brady's 7-3. You can imagine a scenario where he gets to 10 or 11 Super Bowls, and so if he were to get to 11 Super Bowls and go 6-5, I think there are other pathways besides matching or exceeding Brady's sheer number of rings that you could still put him on Brady's level. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he very well could surpass his career totals down the line, although that won't be an easy task for a guy who played well into his 40s. Not many people have done that. I also agree with Kyle's point that people are always going to view that head-to-head loss against Brady as a
2 head-to-head
detriment.
losses.
Well, in the Super Bowl.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. That, especially for Mahomes haters, is always going to be something that they go and point at in the GOAT debate. So and again, it's such a disparate conversation. There's so many factors that go into it, and so many different viewpoints of
Very
fan
fluid
bases.
could be the word you're
Yeah,
looking
I
for.
mean, public opinion is never an easy thing to pinpoint. So there is no one singular stat or number of rings that will put a nail in the coffin of the debate.
Oh, no, not at all.
So it'll be fun to monitor over the next decade.
Marty, we'll bring you back in here. You can take this any way you want. We're at a point of legacy talk because, they just kind of ended this, mostly ended this current era. We're assuming there's going to be a lot of change in the roster. And of course, Mahomes turns 30 later this year is the other reason we're having this talk at this specific point. We stuck to a very football centric, comparing total rings and yards and stats and such. But of course, Mahomes is leaving a lot of legacy behind as well that is, unrelated to football. So you can take it any way you want. What do you see long term as the legacy Mahomes leaves behind here in Kansas City?
So I'll agree. The greatest of all time type debate is never going to end between Brady and Mahomes, no matter what happens. I mean, it's been how many years, and we're still doing the MJ and LeBron from the NBA.
Yep.
Seriously, there will never be an end to it. Brady fans will come up, and I'm going to be a homer here because nobody else will. But Brady fans are always saying, he has 7 rings. Until Patrick does this, he's going to do that. There will be no pleasing anybody, no matter what. I think Patrick's great, and he's definitely number 2, for sure. Could he pass Brady at some point? I don't know. But I feel like his legacy, especially here in the area, is so much greater than just football. Him and his wife being involved in the KC Current, his minority ownership in the Royals, all of the good he does with his 15 and Mahomes Foundation. I mean, really is very involved in the community and really, loves the area. I've heard little chitters of him bringing like a WNBA team here, which I think would be wonderful development. I mean, the T-Mobile Center was built for, these types of things. They have, NBA, regulation, whatever you want to call it, locker rooms and things like that. So I definitely think he's bringing a lot of good in the city, a lot of life. It's always been a sports town here. I mean, everybody in the city is a homer. We're the only ones that wear merch for our town the way that we do, like the KC hearts, the Charlie Hessel t-shirts. You see those everywhere. And I see from people all over the country that post about how they know someone's from Kansas City because of those types of shirts. Like other places, I know they wear their shirts and whatnot, but not like here. Not like here. So I feel like we were lacking, not having a Super Bowl, not doing anything significant with baseball for so long, up until 10 years ago. But it's not that long after he came into the picture and just has grown since then. So I think I assume he'll be here for his entire career. And I'm really just excited to see what else he does and brings to the city, just because things have been wonderful since then. He just brings a lot of joy and life to the city outside of just being a football player.
And WHATABURGER.
Yes, and WHATABURGER. Bobby Jr. helps with that too, but really it was Patrick at the end of the day. He came in clutch.
WHATABURGER, I'm not even a giant fan of most of their food, but like that is a game changer. Like the 11 p.m. to 11 a.m. breakfast thing.
Honey butter shit.
Oh man. I'm really glad that you bring up specifically his minority ownership stake in the Royals. I managed to forget that still. Well, I mean, I don't know what it means exactly. You know what I mean? Like, because I don't even. I'm sure the info is out there. I'm
Yeah,
not sure exactly what his percentage stake in the team is, but like that. I mean, it can only be a good thing for you know, like obviously if John Sherman wants to make a really dumb decision at some point, we'll get into stadium talk in another pod or, any given thing you could think of. It's not like Mahomes can step in and do anything. John Sherman's calling the shots. But, you know, I like that you brought that up because I feel like that's just another thing that can be as an anchor. And I mean that in a positive term, like you know, I do think having another star player, superstar player in town that is invested in the sports community at large, you know, I feel like that can only bring a sense of stability to those other teams. I mean, again, it's hard to quantify what Mahomes being a small minority owner of the Royals does mean, but I mean, it can only be a positive impact to have, a player of that caliber invested in another local team. I just feel like that can only bring a sense of stability to the broader community.
yeah, no, definitely. I think it shows that he is serious about what he's doing here, that he, wants Kansas City as a whole to be successful and not just the Chiefs. Um, and I don't know all that he's involved in with Royals, but I know he's there kind of as just like a hype man, support person is what I see
Yeah.
him every single time, and I think him and Bobby have kind of a unique relationship, both being from Texas, both, the whole WHATABURGER thing. So I think that's a really interesting pairing, and I love that we have both of those guys on a team together, and they are really cohesive, and they just bring, good attention to Kansas City and all of the good people and things that we have here.
Yeah, I mean, Q, I don't know about you, but like I still have to remind myself, every so often that like, well, it Witt probably is solidly number two behind Otani, but Otani's had his fair share of injury issues. So, when it comes to overall raw talent, there might be one player ahead of our Kansas City guy in baseball, but especially when you factor in availability and consistency that they both have, like there's a very legitimate argument to be made that the two big Kansas City franchises on any given day could have the best player in their sport.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about that today. We have two players who could easily be favorites for MVP in their respective sports. I looked it up. I don't think Mahomes is. I mean, I think there's some fatigue there still. And he's coming off not his best season.
No, yeah, I mean, there was no way to make an MVP case for him this year. Really, either
But
of the
if
last 2 years, honestly.
right, right,
But
right. But if you're talking about who's the best, uh, I think the perception is still solidly Mahomes in the NFL, and at least in the American League, I think Witt is probably the
oh yeah, I mean,
favorite for
American
MVP.
League, it's not even a debate.
Yeah.
So
So, but to both your points, I think you couldn't have asked for two better ambassadors for the city than those two, and it's just a really special time to be a sports fan in Kansas City. There's just no doubt about it.
I mean, like, and the sheer luck too of like it's not a lot of guys at that caliber player are A-Rod, you know, and the A stands for ass hat. You know what I mean? Like it's just like the fact that we have not only those two guys you're talking about, but I mean like their Wit especially, he just gives choir boy vibes. And sometimes it's almost like it's goofy, it's funny, but it's also like the sheer luck of not only having him talent wise and popularity wise, but like then the gravy on top, like they're both just ho hum guys, personality and humility wise, and just high quality individuals. I mean, that's not you know that is catching lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, I
So.
think if you look back at Mahomes' first couple seasons, the perception of him was probably similar as a kind of choir boy, kind of just, I mean, amazing, humble guy who doesn't get phased by success and stays kind of true to his roots. But yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we've seen so many star quarterbacks with massive egos. I think Brady takes the cake on that one for sure, but he's got to be one of the most humble NFL superstars in league history, I would think.
All right. Great stuff, y'all. I love that we are able to cycle in, new faces and have people taking times off, and we don't seem to miss a beat. So I think we're holding strong. I appreciate you all joining us, and we will talk to you again soon.